of the languages. And in our days, there are some who, like the Waldenses, do not think the languages are of any use. But although their doctrine is good, they have often erred in the real meaning of the sacred text, and they are without arms against error. And I fear much that their faith will not remain pure. The main issue for Martin Luther was the preservation and the purity of the Christian faith. Where the languages of Greek and Hebrew are not prized and pursued, care, this is my words now, care in biblical observation and biblical thinking and concern for truth decreases. It has to. Because tools to think otherwise are not present. If you do not know Greek, you cannot handle the biblical text as seriously as you could if you knew Greek. It's not a question of preference, it's a question of possibility. It is not possible to handle the biblical text as rigorously, as carefully, to show as much concern for the original intention as if you were reading it in the language in which the apostles wrote. He said, this is him now, if the languages had not made me positive as to the true meaning of the word, I might have still remained a chained monk, engaged in quietly preaching Romish errors in obscurity of a cloister. The Pope, the Sophists, and their anti-Christian empire would have remained unshaken. You see what he thinks hung on his languages? The whole Reformation, he believes, hung on the languages. He says it is impossible for him not to run into obstacles everywhere who does not know the languages. And then he adds this, that freshness and force in preaching come from knowing the languages. He says, but when the preacher is versed in the languages, his discourse has freshness and force. The whole of Scripture is treated, and faith finds itself constantly renewed by a continual variety of words and works. I left out the harsher things that he said about those who have neglected their languages. But now let me say a word I hope will encourage you and exhort you in two ways. Many of you either never have had the time or the will to learn Greek and Hebrew, and many more of you have let them languish. By the way, I'm 50 this month, and I have maybe, Lord willing, 15 more years in this church. And every time I go away in January to renew myself at the Shalom House for a few days, read Martin Luther and think about the year, I find myself, by reading these kinds of things, pricked in my conscience and awakened to revive and renew my efforts with Hebrew. Greek is not a problem for me because I had a chance to teach it. So when you teach something, you really learn it. I never taught Hebrew, and so I've struggled with it ever since seminary days. And so I am resolved again, age 50, this is an exhortation, especially to you younger guys who think, oh, I'm 30, 35, 40, what's the use of me trying with languages because it's too late. Baloney! It's not too late. John Eliot, at age 42, learned the Algonquin language and planted dozens of churches, and the Algonquin language has words in it 23 letters long. You won't find any words in the Greek New Testament 23 letters long. It's not too late. But now here's what I would say to you. Try to ameliorate things here a bit. I would say that knowing the languages can make any devoted preacher a better preacher. More fresh, more faithful, more confident, more penetrating. But it is possible to be a very good preacher and a very powerful preacher without them, at least for a season. The test of our faithfulness, I think, as a corporate body in the church in America or around the world, the test of our faithfulness to the Word is this, if we have lost our languages ourselves. Do we have a heart and a mind large enough to show concern for the whole Church of Christ by promoting the preservation, widespread teaching, and use of the languages? Or are we so weak and frightened and small of self-possession that we have to minimize their importance to justify our ignorance? So I plead with you who do not have the languages to exalt them. Humbly. Exalt them. Now, you can take the time to learn, especially if you're younger. I want to make my Hebrew better in 1996 so that I will be more faithful in my exposition of the Old Testament, more penetrating, more fresh, more reliable. And if you're younger, you can do that. But I have in mind something bigger than that. Suppose you have just settled it. You're never going to know them. You're going to do the best you can with your English Bible. Glorify them. Raise up young men in your church to become language lovers, and tell them you wish you had, and that you wish you could. And if you had your life to live over, you probably would. Glorify them. And when you go to the seminary, tell the faculty, teach them. Stop taking it away. Yes, I don't know them. Yes, I'm a pastor. But I think we need them because the gospel is at stake. And time will show that if we minimize our commitment to the original languages, we minimize attention to specificity in the Bible. It's everywhere today, folks. Minimizing specificity of doctrine is everywhere, and part of it is the loss of the languages. Okay, I think I'm done on that point. No, I'm going to say one more thing. Luther's going to say one more thing. Quote, "It is a sin and a shame not to know our own book or to understand the speech and words of our God. It is still greater sin and loss that we do not study languages, especially in these days when God is..." I marvel at what he's saying here because he's not talking about computers. I have Greek and Hebrew instant parsing in front of me every day. Just get Bible Works, or there's a dozen good programs out there. Boom! It's parsed. Boom! You get the meaning in front of you. Boom! You got 18 examples of it elsewhere. It's just there. Now listen to this in view of that. He says, it is a sin and a shame, especially in these days when God is offering and giving us men and books and every facility and inducement to this study, and desires His Bible to be an open book. Oh, how happy the dear fathers would have been if they had our opportunity to study the languages and come thus prepared to the Holy Scriptures. Oh, how their effort puts our indolence to shame. That was written in the 1500s. Number 4, trait number 4 of Luther. Indolence. He just referred to it. The fourth trait of his study was extraordinary diligence, in spite of tremendous obstacles. He was a professor of Bible all of his life. He wrote theological treatises, scores and scores and scores of them. He was always translating, well, for a period of about 13 years, translating the Bible. He carried on voluminous correspondence because everybody wanted his counsel and advice. And remember, no computers, no typewriters, all longhand, and no ballpoint pens. No ordinary paper. All dip and scratch, dip and scratch. And he was preaching 200 times a year. Now, we are not Luther, okay? These are always discouraging talks if you try to measure yourself by Spurgeon or Luther or somebody. We are not Luther. Let's just settle it. I'm not Martin Luther. I can't read more